Could the media please leave the room? Committee is ready to start its business.
Madam Chair, I would like to move my motion.
We have the witness before us. We have seen your motion. It has been passed through committee, and we'll be discussing it in the last 15 minutes.
As I have the floor, I believe I have support to deal with this right now.
This is an order of the committee, and I'd like to follow the order of the committee, and we have a witness before us. And what I'd like to suggest to the witness is, I know that you've brought in your legal counsel, and it says witness giving testimony may be assisted by counsel, but they must first seek the committee's permission. And I'd like to seek the committee's permission if legal counsel can stay. And the role of the counsel, when permitted, is restricted to an advisory role and may neither ask questions nor reply on the witness's behalf. So that's, is the committee in agreement that we can let Mr. Groot agree? Okay. Yes, Ms. Mendez.
Yeah, okay, that's fine, thank you. That's fine.
I understand, Mr. Snowdy, that you had asked that you be sworn in.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay, so I'll send the clerk over to have you sworn in.
I, Derek Snowdy, do swear the evidence I shall give in this examination shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. So, pursuant to the Standing Order 108-3C, the study of renewable energy projects funded. Have a statement that you would like to make for 5 minutes.
Yes, ma'am, if I may.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, unaccustomed as I am present in front of a parliamentary committee, you'll forgive me for a few moments to make a statement, and perhaps through you, I may be offered a bit of latitude. I've worked in the private security and investigation industry for 20 years. I've worked with clients in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Central America. I've held investigator licenses across Canada with the exception of British Columbia and Saskatchewan. I believe that the reason I've been summoned here today before this committee is to offer insight into the media frenzy surrounding a former cabinet minister and current member of parliament. My role to many of you in this room may be confusing and misunderstood because of what I do. I believe I speak for all of my clients in the insurance industry, the banking sector, and government who would choose to remain anonymous because they, like me, believe that neglect is the ally of many. And it is because of neglect that investigators are retained. The job of investigators, if you will, is to dig into the activities and statements that people make. Your role, too, is to examine the issue before you. The notion that neglect is an ally is a strong statement. It presupposes that as normal, everyday, respectful citizens, we take what people say as the truth. In fact, one can make the absolute leap that what generally happens in this place is built upon that premise. Most importantly, Madam Chair, neglect is not the purview of this place. It is all around us and in our everyday lives. And neglect as an ally is the reason its clients seek my counsel and professional skills of an investigator in the first place. When the facts I uncovered as an investigator regarding the proponents of this committee's mandate came to light, I sought the advice of friends who understood way better than I how things here in Ottawa work. I agreed to be the client's wishes and contact individuals in public office, be they functionaries to politicians or politicians themselves. When I brought to light the issues that appeared to affect the government, I advised the government. The reaction of the government, albeit a part of the mandate of this committee, has nothing to do with me. It appears, however, and I am an unwilling participant in this little drama. I am here, Madam Chair, because your committee believes I can shed some light on this matter. I hope that my presence here can help clear up some of the misconceptions about this matter and that we can move on as an investigator in my professional life. Madam Chair, through you to the committee members, I humbly submit that this matter has been and is a tough issue to manage through for the individuals who are at the center of it. Many people have made assumptions about the evidence and information I collected during the case. Many people have made assumptions about the investigation as a result of media spin. I appear before you today to speak to the facts and connect the dots, as I did with the clients and victims during the investigative process. Many friends with whom I have spoken have felt there is way too much being made of this issue in the first place when it appears to have effectively been dealt with by the Prime Minister. I hope and trust my presence here today will serve to offer perspective and close this chapter, and that we don't neglect those other important matters that we look to you to manage.
Thank you, Mr. Snowdy. We'll go to the first round of questions. Ms. Siobhan Cody for 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate you being here today. And as you said, this is about getting to the truth and speaking to the facts. So I'm glad you made that as a point in your opening statements, and we'll certainly get to that. I just want to ask a couple of questions to begin. You had information that you felt was significant enough to bring to the attention of the conservative lawyer Arthur Hamilton, I believe his name was. What information exactly did you bring to Mr. Hamilton's attention?
Well, I think there's a little bit of a leap in that question. If I may, maybe I can go back to you with this. The information that I had and the direction that I went with it was after consultation or receiving direction from the client. Yeah. I didn't make the emails or the telephone calls of my own initiative. They were a result of the spiraling situation that seemed to appear on the morning of April 8th. You can well imagine that a number of my clients woke up to the Toronto Star on Thursday, April 8th, and pretty soon afterwards my BlackBerry became fairly active.
And they asked you to go present this to
There was a lot of discussion, and it went on for a few hours.
Okay. And then you went to see you made calls. I think this is all in the public record. You made a call. Eventually you had a call back from the lawyer Arthur Hamilton?
I sent out some emails at around 12:30 in the afternoon, and I sent it to my member's assistant, and I sent it to an executive of my writing association after I'd received the direction from my client to disclose certain facts.
Okay, great. Sorry, we only have 8 minutes, so I'm going to be a little pressed for time. What information did you bring to Mr. Hamilton?
We're not going to squeeze that in 8 minutes. I mean, I had an hour-long conversation with him on the phone. When I did return his call, it was 11 o'clock at night. He had been trying to get a hold of me for many hours.
All I'm interested in is the information.
We went through the steps in the case, what I could confirm, information we collected, what we had validated.
So you had evidence that you presented to him of what nature? I
didn't present him. We discussed the case.
You discussed the case?
We discussed the case. I indicated that we did have a business relationship between Mr. Galani and Mr. Jaffer.
And that concerned you how?
It didn't concern me. It concerned my client.
Okay. We've established that. So it concerned your client how?
There were a number of problems that had circulated throughout the day with respect to what was becoming essentially the client's issue was Mr. Galani, and the story had become a Mr. Jaffer, Ms. Jurgis issue as a result of Mr. Donovan's investigation.
And what did you, when you met with Mr. Hamilton, what did you anticipate would happen based on the information you were bringing on behalf of your client? What did you anticipate?
I never presented Mr. Hamilton with any information.
When you discussed it with him?
We discussed very specific questions. Arthur and I had very careful conversation. Would you like me to give an example of one of those questions?
Specifically around Mr. Jaffer's business dealings would be?
I'll give you an example of one of the questions. Mr. Hamilton asked me, is it possible that someone can produce a photograph or a record whereby the minister, her husband, and his business partner, who is awaiting trial on fraud-related materials, who is a warrant for his arrest for a handgun possession issue, and is admitted to being involved in this escort agency, are dining together? And I said yes.
And so did you see that photograph?
That wasn't a photograph to my knowledge. The question was, where could it have been done? And I told him where and when it could be located. I said, all you have to do is go over to Sassafras and pull the security video.
Okay, and because we've had evidence before us from Mr. Galani saying that photograph doesn't exist. So what else did you exactly say? Like, what did you say? What else did you discuss with Mr. Hamilton besides the photograph?
We had those types of discussions. Is it possible that clients of mine met with Mr. Galani and Mr. Jaffer with the idea that they could open up government funds and grants? And I said, yes. I have clients that will say they met with them for that purpose. Those were the types of questions we had back and forth.
So just to that question, so you have evidence or you have you've had discussions with this particular lawyer saying that Mr. Jaffer could get government grants. That's what you understood?
I understood from my client that the meeting he was brought to by Mr. Glanny and Mr. Jaffer was for the purpose of Mr. Jaffer facilitating access to this green fund funding and special consideration by members of the government, that was his niche in the partnership.
Okay. And that special consideration, could you describe what was meant by that, what was understood by that special consideration?
Understood by the client?
Yes.
As they related to me?
Yes.
It was their understanding that this was the back door.
So that Mr. Jaffer could get them in the back door of government to give them, whatever privileged access, special access, whatever word you want to use, to getting green funds.
That was their understanding.
Did they understand that they could that would be secured on their behalf? And how were they? What was their understanding of how that Mr. Jaffer was going to get paid for that service?
I don't think they had an understanding of how Mr. Jaffer would get paid. That went more to the previous business schemes that Mr. Glanny had put into place as to how his partners are compensated.
Okay, and that's the contract I assume that they had that talked about finder's fees. Were you aware of anything that Mr. Jaffer did do for your client, besides the offer of special access, privileged access, backroom access, whatever word you want to use? Are you aware of anything that he actually did deliver for the client?
Well, because he was in business with Mr. Glanny, and Mr. Glanny's never actually delivered on anything, I think the safe answer to that is no.
Can you also help me with a bit of a point of confusion? I understand that you had a meeting on or about August 7th where Glanny claimed to have a connection to the Tory party, Conservative Party, through Mr. Jaffer. And the date that's been circulated was in early August.
It was a Wednesday night on King Street in Toronto. I believe it was the 5th. I think most people are referencing it to the 7th because what they're doing is looking at their credit card records that show the transaction posted after midnight.
So what exactly transpired at that? Because Mr. Glanny has said that he didn't meet Mr. Jaffer until the end of August. Just trying to establish timelines here so that we can look at what Mr. Jaffer was offering to government.
We took a look at
the clients.
Right. We took a look at that situation, and of course we post-mortem it like anybody else does. And given Mr. Glanny's previous conduct, we feel that he was a scheduled introduction, yet he obviously took the leap to identify Mr. Jaffer as a current business partner.
I have one more quick thing before they tell me my time's up. You've obviously kept good records of all this?
We kept record notes.
And could the committee have your notes table? I'd like to ask that you actually provide copies of those to the committee so that we can see the timelines here and how this transpired.
There is a provincial law with respect to how the work product is governed for licensed investigators in the province of Ontario.
Can I ask the chair to take that under advisement?
I will take it under advisement, and I have legal counsel here as well that I can consult.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Cody. And we're now going to Monsieur Guimont for 8 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome, Mr. Snowdy. Thank you. Can you hear the interpretation? And again, thank you so much for being here. Interpretation, English channel, can you hear the interpretation? 1, 2, 3. Yes, good. Thank you. I hope this will not be taken off my time, Madam Chair. Well, Mr. Snowdy, Minister Georges seems to not understand the reasons why she was kicked out of cabinet and out of the Conservative caucus. The Prime Minister Harper, in the House, refused to explain the reasons why he kicked out Ms. Georges from the Conservative cabinet and caucus. There have to be reasons for this. Can you enlighten us on that matter? Can you tell us why you think the Prime Minister dismissed Ms. Georges? Why do you think she was kicked out of the Conservative caucus?
Pas de spéculer. Est-ce que vous avez
Can you enlighten the committee, or are there things you know, do you have evidence which may incriminate incriminate rather Ms. Georges as far as her behavior is concerned?
There's no evidence or no information with respect to conduct of Ms. Georges in my possession or knowledge.
Monsieur,
Mr. Gilani, who appeared before the committee, seems to be a good client of the legal system. Did you investigate the litigation and any criminal litigation Mr. Gilani is subject to?
I did a background check with respect to some of his litigation and business dealings and found a string of hard litigations from Vancouver, his arrest for carrying an unlawful handgun, his interaction out there, the subsequent dissolvement of those corporations, as well as when he moved to Ontario. I know he gave you information with respect to being in the business for 20-some-odd years. However, none of his corporations survived more than 2 or 3 years, and he rolls clients into those corporations and then dissolves them when the litigation piles in and moves on to another corporation. And that was actually a key to discovering what we call the cookie cutter to his MO, is the word, during this commercial crime spree.
Monsieur Giuliani nous a dit
Mr. Gilani told the committee that his friends, his lady friends, if you will, who had joined him at supper with Mr. Jaffer, were respectable women. What do you have to say to that?
That his lady friend also holds part-time employment through Cachet Ladies Escorts. Mr. Glaney conducted numerous business activities at a Toronto area burlesque establishment where he frequently invited clients and business associates to attend with him, and was, I believe the proper term would be the host of those social evenings. I refer back to the arresting officer's report when the search warrant was executed on him in November, when he was arrested on the current fraud charges that he stands before the courts on. And at that time, he was found in the company of one of the ladies from the escort agency as well.
Monsieur Giuliani aurait rencontré
Mr. Gilani allegedly met with Mr. Jaffer and Ms. Georges in the company of prostitutes. Allegedly cocaine had been consumed and pictures had been taken. Were you present at such an event, and have you seen any such alleged pictures?
Present at any type of social function of that nature. And as I mentioned before, the only information I had with respect to that type of conduct was Mr. Galani's inference of a social relationship with Mr. Jaffer and Ms. Georges made during the August meeting.
Vous avez entendu
You heard that Mr. Gilani
un investisseur
in the past had threatened an unhappy investor and had threatened him with unveiling compromising pictures. Can you tell us a little more about that case?
L'un de mes clients, investisseur, je lui ai demandé lui demander de répondre de son inconduite. L'un des investisseurs lui avait demandé de...
For 1 second, could you speak in the mic so that the translation is off?
Sir, the connection is not proper. Could you test it, please?
Is the translation
English
back
is not
on?
coming through.
Anglais et français, do?
try
Oui?
again.
Okay. We didn't take that
Repeat
off
the
your... Okay, go ahead, respond.
I'm sorry, you would tell me where we were?
Repeat your answer, the last part of it.
Where did you lose me?
Okay.
vous savez qu'un
An unhappy, or rather allegedly, Mr. Gilani had threatened an unhappy investor with revealing compromising pictures. Can you tell us more about this?
One of the principals of the client indicated that at my encouragement when they confronted Mr. Glanny about some of his misrepresentations, that he had sought Mr. Glanny out to discuss them. At such a time, they had a few drinks to discuss the matter, and when he became particularly concerned with his lack of business success, Mr. Glanny and an associate threatened him with photographs that they alleged were of him misconduct during a party at Club Paradise, and he was alleged to have one of his associates stick a gun in his ribs.
Selon vous, là, je vous demande votre interprétation, votre évaluation.
I'm asking for your interpretation, and this is why we've asked you to appear before the committee. You've sworn an oath, and you are protected by parliamentary immunity. In your opinion, is Gilani the type of individual who could have blackmailed Mr. Jaffer and Ms. Georges, the former Minister for the Status of Women?
Sans doute, sans aucun... Without doubt?
Without doubt.
D'accord.
Mr. Gilani denied that he owned an escort agency named Cachet Ladies. Can you tell us a little more about this agency? I put the question to him point blank.
Thanks.
Our investigation revealed that they are an escort agency operating in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Whistler. Mr. Glanny made the statement that he was an equity or a silent partner in the venture, and that was his claim to business associates, etc.
Thank you very much. Mr. Snowdy, when Madame Cody asked for documents, could you repeat what you said so that legal counsel can give his opinion on that matter?
The Private Investigators Licensing Act in Ontario, which regulates the work product of private investigators, holds that information confidential to the client, and under the purview and review of the Ontario Provincial Police Detachment assigned to scrutinize and maintain private investigators. And as such, disclosure of any work product without the client's consent or direction of the OPP is prohibited under the Act. So I'm sure that there's a format here to follow to accomplish that, the committee's interest, but I think I know Mr. Groot's not permitted to respond, but he is an expert on the topic if you wanted to address him.
Would you like to address it?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. Despite the provincial law that we're talking about here, there's no problem for the committee to ask for the documents. The committee can send for records, and they can even be summoned. They're protected, however, by parliamentary privilege, and as we know, they cannot be used in another place. However, given the confidential nature of the documents that Mr. Snowdy is referring to, the committee might want to consider a mechanism by which the confidentiality of the document could be protected by either looking at them in camera or finding a way of looking at them so that some of the information is protected. It's for the committee to decide how they want to deal with this situation.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Brown for 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'm sharing my time with Mr. Jordan. He's going to begin.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Snowdy, thank you for appearing before the committee today to help us. I'll just wait for you to put in your earpiece. Again, thank you for being here today to help us move forward in our study on renewable energy funded by the government. As opposed to my colleagues across the table, I am going to focus my questions on the issue which is the subject of the committee's study. Mr. Snowdy, have you ever had a business relationship with Mr. Jaffer, Mr. Glimou, or any other representatives from Green Power Generation? Mr. Snowdy, have you ever been involved in business relationships specifically related to the Government of Canada's renewable energy projects? Is there any other information which may be relevant to the committee's study on renewable energy projects funded by the Government of Canada? Is there anything else in that order you would like to share with us?
If anything related to this case that touched on any government program, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Snowdy. I think it is clear, based on the answers you have given me, that there's nothing else you can tell us, that you can't answer any of my other questions I would have had, so I'll share my time with my colleague.
Very important that we understand everyone involved in this entire affair that has certainly sparked a lot of interest amongst parliamentarians and those around the country. And the first question I have for Mr. Snowdy is, does the President of the Liberal Party, Alfred Apps, have a relationship with Nazim Galani?
That was one of the situations we grappled with on April 8th. Mr. Galani had made representations that he was represented legally by Mr. Alfred Apps at Fasken Martineau. We did some, or I did some investigating and found out that indeed Mr. Apps did work for Mr. Galani. In fact, Mr. Galani had paid a retainer to Fasken Martineau with respect to litigating one of Mr. Galani's previous victims into bankruptcy. The counterclaim to that action was a cookie cutter for Mr. Galani's other fraudulent business activities. That case was transferred from Fasken Martineau to another Toronto law firm to litigate. And I've actually tracked down the email in which Mr. Galani discusses with counsel at the other firm the transfer of the retainer from Fasken's to their firm. Mr. Apps had been Mr. Galani's counsel on that matter, and in fact helped construct one of the other issues, which is one of the fears my client had was being litigated by Mr. Galani and Mr. Apps when they came forward, as he did bankrupt the other victim. In that matter, that case is Ontario Superior Court Case 07CV 329370 PD3. And the counterclaim to that action from the defendants is, like I said, it's the cookie cutter for how these other frauds were committed. The email attached to the back of it in the affidavit getting off care refers back to the issue at Fasken's. And I did call Fasken's and spoke with the clerk with respect to identifying their case file representing Mr. Galani. So the issue my client dealt with on the day was that as things spiraled out of control here in Ottawa, and Mr. Ignatieff was calling out the Prime Minister for information on Ms. Georges. I mean, 8 days before he was calling for the woman's head on a platter. Now he's taking certain conduct. My clients were getting more and more nervous, knowing full well that Mr. Apps was the getaway driver for Mr. Galani in a previous encounter. So I did research this morning, and apparently this court file is missing from the Toronto courthouse, but luckily enough, I got a copy of it.
It would be interesting to have a copy for that committee. When we speak about the getaway driver for Mr. Galani, Mr. Apps, once again, is the President of the Liberal Party of Canada. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to this relationship that you found in your investigations? Is this a relationship that only ended once this became a national issue?
I'm sorry, with respect to who, Mr. Galani?
The relationship with Mr. Galani and Mr. Apps.
As far as I understood, Mr. Apps was trying to distance himself from Mr. Galani for a while, but he was in full knowledge of Mr. Galani's business activities. I understand that Mr. Galani even sent out an email as recently as a month or two ago indicating that Mr. Apps had referred business to him. I believe that was in March of this year.
March of 2010.
That's my understanding.
Okay, and I understand that the firm has been transferred to, what is the name of the firm that it's been transferred to?
It was transferred to a firm, Teplitsky-Colson.
And do you know when it was transferred to that firm?
I don't know when it was transferred to that firm. No, I believe their file number on the matter should be, it goes by the court file number for the Superior Court with respect to the dates. But I can tell you that they severed the, or attempted to sever the relationship with him on the 28th of May, 2008. This case was Mr. Glennie's previous incarnation before ISI Investments, which was created synonymously with ISI Funds, a very reputable financial institution, but he structured the name similarly. This finance company, or this venture capital firm Mr. Glennie was operating at that time, was known as Ottenrod Holdings, which is just Toronto spelled backwards. It wasn't very creative.
We understand from the media reports that you also contacted, there's this information that you have found, that you also contacted the Liberal Party. Was one of the motivations for contacting the Liberal Party given the relationship with Mr. Apps and Mr. Glennie?
I had no personal motivation to contact the Liberal Party. I was given, obviously, what's lost in translation here is I phoned a direct number, not exactly the number listed in the phone book, and I was given that number directly by a friend, associate, and client named Mark Keeley, who is a prominent Liberal fundraiser and active Liberal. I consulted with him throughout the day, as he had previously been CEO of a company that had been defrauded by Mr. Glennie. And as we watched the circus going on up here, bluntly put, we all felt it was spiraling out of control, and he said, you've got to let these guys know what we know to slow this down. Any
idea why Mr. Glennie failed to mention who his getaway driver was? Any reason why he would have kept that secret?
You'd have to ask Mr. Glennie.
It actually is 5 seconds left, and you can answer the question. Did you answer his question?
No questions, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. We now go to Mr. Martin for 8 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sodi, when you were undercover in meeting with Mr. Gilani, he led you to believe he could set up or has set up bank accounts in Belize to use as shell corporations or whatever people use offshore bank accounts for. And in an interview with the CBC, you said you actually picked out a name of a shell company in Belize, but he said that one already is held by Mr. Jaffer. So he says, I'll put you in touch with Mr. Jaffer and you could talk about that. Do you remember the name of the company on the list that he said was actually being held for Mr. Jaffer?
I actually know a bit about these types of transactions. So what it's part of my investigative field is these types of transactions and financings. And what I did was I said to him, well, I'll take the top 3 oldest incorporations. Now, if I were interested in conducting offshore activities that way, the reason I would want the 3 oldest commercial companies is once they're past the incorporation date of a year, under some of the Central American banking agreements, they qualify for commercial credit. So if I was going to wash money through and deposit stock, sell it, deposit the cash into account, rather than try and take cash out through an ATM machine, which was what Mr. Glennie was suggesting, and create ATM machines in Central American banks and people would draw them out here, white label machines. What you would do then is you would get corporate credit, say a Visa or MasterCard, and you would just spend money paid into that account. Okay, so that was the reason I asked him. He said these were reserved for Raheem and his wife. I can hook you up if you need to talk. It was strange. Belize was strange. I think the top 3. I'd have to go back to the actual list.
Could you share that with us? If we a little more specifics about those top 3 that he said, obviously we'd be interested in knowing.
I'll have to look for my copy of the list. I think I may have given my final copy to the RCMP, but I will find that for you and I can submit it to the committee through your clerk.
Okay, that'd be interesting. Thank you. The other thing is in August 2009, you were working for HD Retail, Inc. They were getting angry or restless that the VENCAP that they were promised wasn't coming through. You said a figure of about $5 million was what Gilani led them to believe they could get in terms of a loan from the Green Infrastructure Fund. That money didn't seem to be forthcoming. They had paid for this money. Did they put some money up so that Mr. Gilani could get them this money from the Green Infrastructure Fund?
They had paid him venture capitalist fees. Consulting fees is probably the better phrase that most people would recognize. But there were numerous levels to how this scheme was to play out. Some were commissioned on grants, some were paying for loans, some was selling these offshore corporations to nominee account holders.
But the only part of it that really is relevant to us is, did this honest company that you represented, was he led to believe that Jelani, through Jaffer, could get access to the green infrastructure loan money?
Absolutely.
So they were told.
They were
Jelani.
coached.
I'm sorry?
They were coached.
Could you explain that?
During their business model is to assist companies in renovating and marketable storefronts, et cetera, changing those programs. Mr. Galani and Mr. Jaffer at the meeting at Le Castile, the president of HD reported back to me that he was coached by them into presenting in front of Mr. Glamont and the others green initiatives for the company. I'll give you an example. If they were to rewrite their business model to suggest that they would replace incandescent lighting with compact fluorescent bulbs, and the other example was that they would streamline the delivery of inventory management system using hybrid vehicles and other, recycled tires, and basically spin their business model
custom craft their application to fit the criteria of this green investment.
That's correct.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you. You took your story to the Liberals and the Conservatives. You didn't bring it to the NDP. I'm feeling a little hurt.
Oh, not the first time.
The cell phone pictures. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about this. You said in an interview, I believe, when Jelani said that Mr. Jaffer would be taking a substantial portion of one of these public ventures, you asked him, how are you going to control him? That's correct. And he said, not to worry, I partied with Mr. Jaffer and his wife, and he waggled his cell phone at you. You took that to mean that he had something that he could use against Mr. Jaffer.
2 weeks later, we took it at that. I originally thought, well, he's going to call him, he's going to, they're social, they're going to maybe do party. It wasn't until the cell phone photos that were used to intimidate and blackmail the other principal that it became, okay, the cell phone, the camera. And then we found out a couple days later that indeed that he had been using the cell phone to photograph people regularly, not just that particular individual, at Club Paradise while they received lap dances and other backroom favors. So there was a
backroom favors, as in, well, whatever happens.
Whatever happens, yeah.
Strip club, I see.
So that was it was all piece by piece by piece, and as it went through. So, and that's exactly, to be clear, the type of discussion I had with Arthur Hamilton.
Could you tell us, why do you think the Prime Minister acted so swiftly to fire Helena Georges?
You want me to speculate?
Yeah.
The same reason we had some concern, and the concern here is optics. Bluntly put, and if I may, sir, on March 31st, the leader of your party, the leader of the Liberal parties, were calling for this woman's head on a platter, and had been quite regularly. Now, as the story broke, and I think it's very important here, I was contacted by the Star, who were already working a story with respect to this. I consulted with the clients, and they allowed me to speak on certain topics. And when that story came out on April 8th, and I'd spoken with the Star at the beginning of March, this was weeks later that it came out. I was already scheduled to leave on a business trip on the Sunday morning. First calls I got were saying, we didn't want to talk about this. And I said, well, I got news for you. I didn't. This is Mr. Donovan's investigation. He's done a hell of a job. He got his own sources.
Mr. Martin, you have 45 seconds if you want to use that time.
45 seconds. Well, maybe we can get to that on the next round, but just in the bit of time that I have, your primary client then was HD Retail. Mr. Dennis Graces, is that that's really why you went undercover, though, to try and find out more about Mr. Jelani, because Jelani wasn't coming through with promises he made to HD Retail.
The initial proposition Mr. Galani made did not fit with traditional venture capitalist presentations, and having my previous involvement in these types of schemes, investigating them with respect to other cases, I was well aware that there was a dark side to this, and it was not on the up and up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Martin. We go to the second round of questions. Ms. Mendez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Snowdy. Since April 9th, have you had any other dealings with the Conservative Party or members of the Conservative Party?
Other than speaking with Arthur Hamilton a few times, I have not spoken to any Conservative member of Parliament or any sorry, I did speak with my riding executive in some cursory pleasantries, but the only person I've spoken to is Arthur Hamilton.
Going back to Mr. Hamilton, could you give us perhaps more examples of the discussions you had with him, or examples, specific examples that you discussed with him on that first phone conversation?
On the first phone conversation on the Thursday evening, April 8th, I actually spent an hour just detailing with him the extent of the Glaney background, and I will tell you exactly what I said to him. Is I said, amongst these crazy and outlandish claims he makes while soliciting to business for his plans and schemes.
We're talking about Mr. Gilani here.
Correct. The problem was some of the most outlandish things he said were coming true. You know, he would hit the craziest ones out of the park as being factual. You know, he would say, "I'm doing business with Mr. Jaffer, and he's a partner." Well, what do we know? We know that he did do business with Mr. Jaffer. He was in a relationship. He sent out a text message to someone on the night of September 12th, and sure enough, saying, "I'm out with dinner with Rahim and his wife, the minister." And we went and checked. Sure enough, he was out with her. He had indicated that he had connections to members of organized crime from the West Coast. We made some inquiries and found out he did attend a party in the company of some known members of organized crime out west. He was already in very weird situations.
But we are talking about Mr. Gilani.
Absolutely.
And how did this tie in with Mr. Jaffer or Ms. Gurgis?
Well, Mr. Jaffer is Mr. Gilani's business partner. They are in a business relationship. And so this becomes, back to Mr. Martin's question, this is an issue of optics. You know, when the Minister for the Status of Women is dining in a restaurant with a man awaiting trial on serious crimes and with a history of serious criminal activity and an escort with a business partner in Mr. Jaffer, given the recent attention she had received, you tell me how would the Hill here have responded to that photograph or that video showing up? You'd be back in it.
Were there any criminal allegations or in nature of criminal allegations that you discussed with Mr. Hamilton?
Related to whom, ma'am?
To Mr. Jaffer and Ms. Burgess.
Not to Ms. Burgess, but I have serious concerns about the structure in which the deals were being negotiated with Mr. Jaffer and Mr. Gilani. They paid serious interest into schemes that I was familiar with.
Could you elaborate on what kind of schemes we're talking about?
During my career as an investigator, I worked on some pump and dump and market manipulation schemes, investigations, both with lawyers and with individual clients. Those are mostly found in what's known as Project Aura, Project Aura 2, and Project Eldon, which are the RCMP code names for those projects.
Okay, and are these the allegations that the RCMP is looking into?
I couldn't speak for the RCMP, ma'am. You'd have to ask Inspector Cooper.
And while you have met with the RCMP, you gave them documents that you say that are not yet in the public domain. Can you provide the committee with those documents? I
think I probably could get those copies from Inspector Cooper here or retrieve those.
1 minute.
Thank you very much. Something that struck me from the interview you gave on April 28, you seemed to indicate that you were aware that the Prime Minister was going to hold this press conference where he was going to announce Minister Gurge's dismissal, if you wish, or resignation. How did you come about knowing this beforehand?
On the morning of April 9th, Arthur Hamilton phoned me, asked if I would come to his office and see him for a few minutes. I drove downtown. I went to see him, and while I was sitting in his office, we spoke for about a half an hour, at which point in time Mr. Hamilton said, I've spoken about these issues with the Prime Minister. Obviously, the Minister has been under other scrutiny for the last 18 months with respect to her other conduct issues. And then the Prime Minister leaves the Vimy Memorial Service today. He will be holding a press conference and announcing that he has accepted her resignation, which I thought was a strange fact recently that everybody keeps saying he fired her and we know in fact she resigned. So, I was told about 20 minutes before it happened.
Thank you. We now go to Monsieur Guimont. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Snowdy, Mr. Galani, in answer to a series of questions I put to him 2 weeks ago, replied that he would sue you. Has he begun court action against you?
I welcome that opportunity.
Est-ce qu'il a demandé?
Did he ask for an injunction to prevent you from revealing what you know, from presenting your information? He was fairly categorical about that. I tried to understand what he was saying. I asked him, why did Mr. Snowdy come out and bring forward what he knows? He did not ask for an injunction to prevent you from coming forward.
He has finally realized that while he was focused on me as an individual, he forgets that he presented this scheme in the company of others, and that restricting me or attempting to restrict me in any way, shape, or form, isn't going to do him a lot of good unless he listed everyone else. When he presented the list of offshore companies, because we stepped aside while he did it to me, he forgets that he had done it 30 seconds before to a group of 10 people. I think the other reason is currently his lawyer, Mr. Michael J. Taylor, is serving his 3rd suspension from the Law Society for failure to cooperate with an investigation. And as far as I know, currently the only person he has representing him is a pet photographer.
À votre connaissance, comment M. Giuliani...
As far as you know, how does Mr. Galani earn a living? How does he make money? When he appeared before the committee, he said that he seemed to have a lot of contacts and that it wasn't necessarily contracts which were being signed, but he had connections. And so in your opinion, how do you think he made his money?
Fraud.
Donc, si je résume votre témoignage.
So if I was to summarize your testimony, and again, I don't want to put words into your mouth, just tell me if you agree with this or not. You are basically telling us that Mr. Galani is a fraudster. Is that correct?
Puis vous me dites que...
He's a con artist, and you are saying that Mr. Galani is a person who would best be avoided. Is that correct?
Bon. Là, j'en reviens à ces...
Now, I'd like to come back to Mr. Galani's relationship with Mr. Jaffer, the former Conservative Member of Parliament, the former chair of the National Conservative Caucus. How can someone like Galani get the attention of someone like Mr. Jaffer? What advantage would Mr. Galani have to doing business with Mr. Jaffer?
Seen in Mr. Galani's conduct, and as all successful con artists do, they work a scheme of communication and confidence. This is a confidence game, and in this case, Mr. Galani earned the confidence of a family member who had access to Mr. Jaffer and arranged the introduction of the two of them. And I believe he's made a reference to sharing a religious affiliation with Mr. Jaffer.
Oui. Mais si je poursuis plus loin...
Well, if I take that one step further, trust in Mr. Jaffer, but also trust in the contacts of Mr. Jaffer, the contacts which might be of use to Mr. Jaffer, and trust in the doors Mr. Jaffer could open to him. Let me read part of an email which Galani sent on Friday, September 11th. he stated that we had an intense experience with Mr. Jaffer and Mr. Chan last night, and Mr. Jaffer opened to us the doors to the Prime Minister's office. In your opinion, what does this mean? That was your last question, Madam Chair. You've got to be kidding, Madam Chair. We'll let the witness respond.
To me and to the clients was interpreted that by doing business with Mr. Galani and paying Mr. Galani his fees, that he would utilize his business relationship with Mr. Jaffer to find government grants and fundings for them to continue and finance their business.
Merci. Thank you. We now go to Mr. Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just want to follow up on the first round of questioning. Originally, when this issue came to the forefront in the House of Commons, we saw Liberal MPs like Wayne Easter speaking ferociously that Helena Georges should be kicked out of cabinet, and it couldn't have been a day too soon. And then all of a sudden, that changed. It was, oh, how come you kicked Helena Georges out of cabinet? And this change of position, this surprising change, makes me wonder why we've seen this change in the Liberal Party position. And maybe it has to do with the person that you described as the getaway driver for this serial fraudster, as you've described Mr. Galani. So could we start off by, could you describe what you meant when you said a getaway driver in reference to Alfred Apps, who once again is the President of the Liberal Party of Canada?
Obviously, when you retain a lawyer to represent you and act in your interests, they become privy to your conduct and your matters. In the case of Aeroform Metals, which Mr. Galani holds out to be his client and a successful client, when in fact they were a client of ISI's, when in fact, I'm sorry, they were not a client of ISI's, they were a client of his previous company, Ottenrod Holdings. These people were looking to them to support their business, to finance them, to allow them to continue into business. And when they objected to Mr. Galani's conduct and the fact that they were paying for monies, and they were in fact where he was receiving monies from investors and never forwarding it on to them, when they decided to try to walk away from Mr. Galani, he used the legal process to put a claim against them, to burn up the remaining capital, and basically to force the company into an insolvent position. And the lawyer, obviously involved in getting that together, becomes aware of how their client conducts themselves. And the statement of the counterclaim to that action lays out Mr. Galani's egregious conduct in Technicolor. So, the person who uses to squeeze, Mr. Apps is not an associate at a small firm. When Mr. Galani embarks on dragging someone whose name is important into his business dealings, obviously there's a bit of fear and intimidation that comes with this. So, my interpretation of that is that this is somebody who had full knowledge of how Mr. Galani conducted himself. And Mr. Galani was very much the subject of that article in the Toronto Star on April 8th. So, when you have
So you said, so you believe Mr. Apps had full knowledge of the way Mr. Galani conducted himself?
Absolutely. Mr. Galani told people that Mr. Apps represented him. We found Mr. Apps' fingerprints on this litigation, that it's a cookie cutter for the other frauds he committed.
So not only was he the getaway driver, but you also said previously that he sent him business.
I recently learned that as recent as March of this year, an email was sent from Galani representing that potential clients had been referred to him by Mr. Apps. I do understand that Mr. Apps has interpreted his meeting with Mr. Galani in March a little differently, but again, prior to all of this hullabaloo, they are known to one another and in fact did have a previous relationship.
This sounds like a much closer relationship than typical between a lawyer and their client. I practiced law before politics. I never got involved in recommending business to clients. It seems an unusual step. Do you know when the origin of the relationship between the President of the Liberal Party began with Mr. Galani?
I do not.
Is it possible that it dates significantly far back?
I would say at least 3 or 4 years, back to 2006, 2007 at least, possibly longer.
Is it possible that Mr. Galani has a relationship with other prominent Liberals?
Couldn't speak to that. I don't know.
Do you have any information on the proximity of the relationship with Mr. Apps and Mr. Galani? Do you know if it was if they met often or whether it was more infrequent?
I don't. My only knowledge of Mr. Apps and Mr. Galani is Mr. Galani telling the partnership at HD that he was represented by Mr. Apps in his legal matters, and then confirming, in fact, that they did have a relationship, going further to know that Mr. Apps had actually.
Mr. Brown, time's up. Sorry, go ahead. Finish that sentence.
That Mr. Apps had been involved in that conduct with him.
Thank you. We now go to Ms. Cody for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in a couple of things that you've said. First of all, you said that you met with Arthur Hamilton on several times. That was what you just said a few moments ago. Where did you meet Mr. Hamilton? When did these meetings occur?
I think I've met with Arthur a grand total of, including the April 9th meeting, 4 times in total, I believe. They are always at his office.
Okay. Was anyone else present at those meetings, or just you and Mr. Hamilton?
Just me and Mr. Hamilton.
Okay. What did you discuss? Was you continuing to discuss Mr. Jaffer's involvement with Mr. Galani? Was the general topic over those 4 meetings?
Yes, I would say that the topic would be Mr. Jaffer and Mr. Galani.
Did you go into details on what exactly your client's concerns were? You discussed them. You said in the original meeting you were kind of having this discussion that he'd put up a scenario and you'd agree with the scenario. Did that continue through 4 meetings?
No. Okay. We obviously, after the events started to unfold, it's important to remember that I had some clients who thought that I had disclosed details of their investigation to the Star, when in fact it was the Star who had done their own work.
Sure. You've established that fact. So at the 3 subsequent meetings, so the first one you did this kind of, could this happen? You did the yes, no. At the other 3, were you presenting evidence to Mr. Hamilton about what, the relationship between Mr. Jaffer and Mr. Galani?
Mr. Hamilton is a securities lawyer.
Yeah.
So I was able to speak with him more specifically about the mechanics of the type of scheme Mr. Galani was constructing and how he had compensated other silent partners, if you will, which would have included a compensation scheme for Mr. Jaffer. Okay,
so you did get to the compensation scheme for Mr. Jaffer, because I did review the Star where they talked about the promised $5 million, have seen the emails that talk about how excited they all were about this. I have a short period of time. Were you, as you know, the Prime Minister, when he stood in the House, he talked about that he's received information from a reliable source. Are you the reliable source?
You'd have to ask the Prime Minister.
Do you think you're the reliable source?
I've started to ignore the media reports on this almost as soon as they started. I mean, they got as much wrong as they got right.
Do you know of any other source that the Prime Minister may have had?
I'm sure the Prime Minister has several resources.
On this issue, do you know of any other source he may have had that was speaking to Mr. Hamilton about these issues prior to the announcement?
Not that I'm familiar with.
Okay. You said earlier on that Madam Georges was, and I wrote it down, under scrutiny for 18 months for conduct. Could you explain what you meant by that?
We had a brief discussion with respect to the attention the opposition parties were paying to her over the previous 12 to 18 months.
Can you be specific on? I mean, not the recent ones of February.
I think we all know the
PEI. The PEI one was recent, but 18 months.
Yeah, I think it went back. I'm not sure what the furthest issue going back was, but I'd have to go and look. I mean, it wasn't a formalized conversation.
Did anything you say to Mr. Hamilton in any way implicate Georges apart from that one dinner with Mr. Galani and being married to Mr. Jaffer?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Did you say anything, or did you speak to Mr. Hamilton about anything to implicate Madam Georges, apart from that one dinner with Mr. Galani and being married to Mr. Jaffer? Was there anything besides being married to Mr. Jaffer and Mr. Jaffer's business dealings with Galani? Was there anything over and above that in the dinner?
We discussed some coincidences with respect to the case. Given the example that of all the offshore banking havens that are around the world, why was Belize on this list? Considering, I mean, it was a strange country to have on a list.
Anything else besides Belize? And then I need to table a document.
Not off the top of my head. Like I said, it wasn't. Arthur and I both agreed that we probably should have recorded the meeting just for our own sake at this point.
Okay. I also have to table a statement, Madam Chair, from Fasken Martineau, who talked about the leading international business law and litigation firm made the following statement concerning comments made the day before the House of Commons Committee. Mr. Brown was referring it in his questioning. In November 2006, Mr. Galani of ISI approached Fasken Martineau through one of its partners. I think it's known, Mr. Alfred Apps. They met. They did receive documents from Mr. Galani. They accepted a retainer check. However, shortly thereafter, Fasken Martineau declined to act on behalf of the International Strategic Investments. Mr. Apps so advised Mr. Galani return the retainer. I'd like to table this.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cody. We now go to Mr. Walkington for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I wonder, and obviously we don't have Mr. Apps here before us today. We actually have Mr. Snowdy. But the question, or the question I'd ask Mr. Apps is, when the statement says shortly after the relationship was discontinued, they don't specify the length of time in that statement. Certainly, we would be interested at this committee as to how long that relation continued for. I'm wondering, Mr. Snowdy, do you know as to when the relationship with that law firm? You referenced some documents earlier that there were some documents as it relates to their relationship. Do you have any dates on those documents?
There's dates on the statement of claim, the counterclaim, and then the affidavit from the lawyer acting for Toplitsky Colson, who's now over at Blaine McMurtry. And this is 07 obviously indicates it's a 2007 court matter. And the email with respect to the application to be removed from the action submitted as an item to support the affidavit of the applying counsel was dated March 10th, 2008.
Okay, so there was action initiated by Mr. App's firm. It wasn't simply a returning of the documents. Is that you're suggesting that in fact there was?
I have a point of order. Just 1 second. Yes, Ms.
I'd like to ask, Madam Chair, that those documents be tabled, please.
Thank you. The statement of claim?
Yes.
And counterclaim, so
Yes,
that
please.
the committee has a full.
Sure, I'll give them to Mr. Girard.
Sure, thank you. I'll continue on.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think that would be helpful. Yeah, we'd all be interested in terms of those documents, because I think they may help establish the time frame by which this cozy relationship continued for. Today, we've covered a number of different things. Obviously, you stated earlier we've had a committee meeting that discussed many things, but we didn't get to much discussion as it relates to renewable energy projects. You stated earlier that you had little information or no information as it relates to the Green Fund. I just want to clarify again, do you have any information as it relates to funds being allocated to different projects from the Green Fund or things that are funded by the government for renewable energy projects?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Madam Chair, the motion that we originally had in this committee was related to those types of projects. We were very interested as a committee to ensure that taxpayer dollars weren't going to places that they shouldn't have gone. Clearly, today we haven't moved forward, I guess, in terms of that study. Certainly, we appreciate the information, Mr. Snowdy, that you've brought, but to be honest, it is limited relevance to the committee's study that we're currently undertaking. I'm wondering if you have. Well, you've already stated that you have no information as it relates to renewable energy projects that are funded by the government in general terms either. And so, Madam Chair, I guess generally, I think we have some committee business that we would like to attend to in this committee. There's probably other people that would like to ask questions, so I'll turn my time over to those members, and then I think we should get on with the committee business.
This is the will of the committee. The study is being done, and Mr. Snowdy was the chief witness, according to the chief architect of information. So I would like to, if
okay,
you're
well
giving up your time,
then I would just comment, Madam Chair, that I think that we are going down a slippery slope of devolving into a kangaroo court, and I certainly wouldn't want our committee to be viewed in that way. So, Madam Chair, I just do want to have that on the record. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we now go on to Monsieur Guimont for 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Snowdy, you answered our questions directly, and you also answered directly when I asked you, how does Mr. Galani make his money? I have another direct question for you as far as Mr. Jaffer is concerned. How could Mr. Jaffer earn money? His relationship with Ms. Galani was not a philanthropic relationship or a business or a charity organization. Mr. Jaffer told us that he was not earning a lot of money, and in fact Mr. Galani said the same thing. So how could Mr. Jaffer earn money through this?
Galani schemes and the way this system works in place, and I believe it's you, sir, who have a very good source for some of this information. I think you asked Mr. Galani about the Skyas deal, was it? It struck a note. I know not too many people knew about the Skyas business deal, but let me use that as the example of how Mr. Jaffer would then be compensated in this scheme. Am I correct, sir? Was you that asked Mr. Galani about the Skyas business arrangement? Was Mr. Martin? This is actually, Skyas was supposed to be a 100 million share shell deal from a U.S. company and then rolled out to supposed investors in a pump and dump scheme at $1 a share. So it's a $100 million business venture. I'm sure we've all seen the documents on these types of legal activities. They're copious, and Greenpeace has a fit over the amount of trees that are cut for paper. This is Mr. Galani's business deal for the $100 million deal. It's 1 page long. It's 4 paragraphs, and it's how to obtain the Shell Corporation. That Shell Corporation is then distributed the shares in those to nominee account holders, the purpose of which is to avoid the regulations in the securities industry for disclosing more than 10% ownership. Now, Mr. Galani constructed this list of nominee shareholders by which people would receive shares in the company, and they included principals in the actual corporation. What Mr. Galani forgot to do when he did this deal was he forgot to include himself on there as receiving any shares. All of his nominee shareholders, their children, various holding companies, etc., are on this list. And when he can, this is how Mr. Jaffer would have made money on, say, I think the reference that the Star reported on was Right Tech. So if we take Right Tech as an example and say they're rolled into a Shell deal, what would then happen is a corporation, either an individual account at an investment firm or at an offshore bank would be established, and stock in that company would be deposited into those accounts and then sold into the public market during the promotion phase of the market manipulation activity. Therefore, that's how Mr. Jaffer could be compensated in accordance with Mr. Galani's previous schemes.
So this involves offshore bank accounts, and this leads us to Belize. At least 3 companies had been set aside for Mr. Jaffer and his wife. Of course, Belize is a tax haven, and this is known around the world. Isn't that correct?
Any of the accounts have been reserved for Mr. Jaffer and his wife. I think it's important for everyone to understand that Mr. Galani never mentioned Ms. Georges by name, always referred to her as Mr. Jaffer's wife.
Étiez-vous au courant que Mme Gergis, lorsqu'elle était secrétaire...
Did you know that when Ms. Georges was parliamentary secretary to the Minister for International Trade, she went to Belize on official business? I don't have the exact date, but do you know that she went to Belize on official business?
That was one of those serendipitous circumstances we stumbled upon. When we made some inquiries as to why, of all the offshore tax havens, why Belize? And it raised some questions in our investigative process is, why not Liechtenstein? Why not the Isle of Man? Why not other well-known tax havens? Why Belize? And then we find that she had traveled to Belize and in the company of Mr. Jaffer, and in that capacity would have had access to commercial business individuals in that country. It was either a wonderful coincidence, complicity, or a skillful manipulation on Mr. Galani's part to pick that country.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Martin, for 5 minutes.
Further about Belize, Mr. Snowdy, the three that you expressed an interest in your undercover role, you chose them because they had been around for a longer period of time. You said that would have been the best choice because they were established for a year or longer. Would that indicate to you that Rahim Jaffer would have set them up a year or longer, or could he have put his name onto them at any time, for instance, during the trip to Belize?
He could have, as I recall, those companies had actually been incorporated a couple of months after his trip. We had to postulate some ideas and to theorize, when you work on this type of thing. And we said, well, if you went there, could you have created a relationship, been introduced to people, and over the course of the next month or two, opened an account, set up lawyers, had access to it? Yes, that very much was a working consideration in our mind when examining Mr. Galani's bona fides.
Thank you. Did Mr. Jelani ever tell you that Jaffer had special access or good access to government funds or any influence over the allocation of those government funds?
Of the three names that I assumed in dealing with Mr. Galani by telephone and in my meeting with him in person, he never spoke about Mr. Jaffer's direct relationships, only that he had the relationship with Mr. Jaffer, and that was implied all the benefits that relationship would come with.
Your client paid Jelani a VENCAT fee, you call it, in the hopes of getting a $5 million loan. Presumably it would be Jaffer's job to help deliver on that $5 million loan. What would be Jaffer's, again speculating, what do you think would be Jaffer's share of the finder's fee that your client paid to Jelani?
Your fee would have been $500,000, 10%.
Yeah. Wow. Again, on the pump and dump thing, is there not a further element to this market manipulation in that the initial offering goes out at a buck or whatever? Some of those principals could have been given a large block of shares at that entry-level fee, a buck a share. You then drive up the value of the shares by whatever means you can. At that point, could the original principals not sell out, and then you can short that stock and manipulate it back down again and buy back in later? Is that the rest of the modus operandi of Jelani?
If the corporation was eligible to be shorted, you could short it after you withdrew the market support. Whether you're paying for that market support in terms of manipulating stockbrokers, promoters, etc. Yeah, that's very much a possibility, and you can actually make a lot more money shorting it and covering your short or going long later. Cover the short, go long, and catch it on the double bounce.
Which is even more sleazy in my view, in that the people that you're selling it to at the higher rate, if you know full well you're going to manipulate that stock back down later, you're obviously lying to the people up here who are buying in at $10 a share.
Exactly.
It's about as dishonest as it gets, I suppose. And you're saying that's a sort of a standard practice that you see in these people that set about manipulating these companies like Jelani. That's a practice that they employ.
That's a standard scheme.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if you could, just to remind you, if you could remember any of the names of the 3 companies and beliefs that you would have chosen if you were a real investor, or if you could get back to the committee, that would be of great interest.
I'll give you the actual list, and I'll get a copy of it, and I will get it over to you. I'll give it to Mr. Girard.
Right. Very good.
Question, Mr. Martin?
You said one of the people that you went to was Peter Donolo, and you believe the other one was Patricia Sorbara. You phoned their office, spoke to their assistant. You're saying, I spoke with an assistant. I asked to be put through to either of them. Said they weren't available. You left your name, phone number, etc. Neither of them got back to you or interested in this, in what you had to offer to the Liberal Party.
I called them, I identified myself, I identified who had given me the number and referred them to them. I told them I was acting on the direction of my client, identified the individual, and provided my name and number. And I told them that I was the investigator that was principal behind this case, and we could provide them with the proper information. And this was done as a result of the day's follies.
And they didn't get back.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Snowdy, I've just reviewed the documents you've given us, and so that the committee is clear of what it is receiving, I'd like to read it out because it's not in French, it's not bilingual. I'll have to read out what we have received. We have an ISI deal memo signed by Nazim Gilani, but Israel Goldrich is not signed, with a Schedule A with the identity of shareholders, and another ISI deal memo. The second one I have is your timeline, ISI GPG timeline.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
That's not my timeline, ma'am. That's a copy of the timeline that Mr. Galani produced.
Okay, so you're giving it to us.
It was just another copy back. The interesting part is when he alleged that we were meeting, I wasn't even in town.
Okay, so it's August 20th, 2009, and ends April 13th, 2010, with Rahim Jaffer and the trip. And then there is an email from Nazim Gilani to Ian Harvey, and then there is from Nazim Gilani to Michael Mihelik on January 25th, 2010, Canada Revenue Agency, April 6, 2010, and from Rahim Jaffer to Alexander Prince, dated March 30th, 2010. Now, what you have done is given us the claim and counterclaim, and I just want to clarify so that the people here know. It was between Ontnorot Holdings and Nazim Gilani and Paul Kolachi. It's a statement of claim, and the lawyers. Okay.
Point of order?
Yes.
Could we just maybe have those circulated when they're available?
It is not.
We just have.
I'll tell. Yeah, when they're available. Yeah, sure.
We just have limited. We have limited time, and I know there's still questions that want to be asked.
The reason I'm asking is because he mentioned Faskin Calvin, and I can't find it here. That's why I just want to double check that I'm not missing anything in here. Yes.
There were other documents that I had asked for at the beginning. Any evidence that was put forward, anything that you have, documentation. I had asked earlier if he would bring that forward. We had a legal interpretation. Perhaps your client, because he's been forthcoming to Mr. Hamilton, he might be forthcoming to this committee as well. So I'd appreciate that information.
Thank you. Okay. So now I go back to my order, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And similarly to your question, wanted to touch upon the Oternaut, and if you could reference to us, how is Mr. Galani involved with Oternaut?
Mr. Galani was the owner of Ottenrod Holdings.
Mm-hmm. And for what information do you have with Faskin Martineau's relationship with Oternaut, or Mr. Apps's relationship with Oternaut?
We had relied on Mr. Galani's statement to the clients that he was represented by Mr. Apps, and then made contact to find out that his retainer to Mr. Apps was with respect to that file, and that Mr. Apps had deferred the litigation to Teplitsky-Colson. That was significant because during the meeting when Mr. Galani was trying to sell these offshore companies to individual nominees for HD Retail, saying you should buy an offshore corporation from me for $7,500 U.S. First of all, I know that it costs $3,000 to establish an offshore corporation, not $7,500. So I knew he was looking to pocket $4,500 a company from each of these individuals. He then tried to take his scheme a step further and suggested to everyone at the meeting that locally those offshore corporations were administered by Teplitsky Colson. Now, Teplitsky Colson's a litigation firm with no business office. It made about as much sense to me as going to a neurosurgeon for a vasectomy. They didn't. They weren't compatible, but Mr. Galani didn't know that I had that knowledge.
And when again was it transferred to the other firm?
You have to ask the firm of Fasken Martineau. I'm not sure when they did it.
But it says the relationship started in November 2006. The statement that was shared with us by Ms. Cody suggests that it was only a brief relationship, and there's no reference at all to this to their work on the Oternaut Holdings Inc.
You have to go to the affidavit in the file. Originally, Teplitsky Colson looked to get off the file because there was a payment issue. I had a hard time tracking down Mr. Galani's support that Mr. Apps was indeed his counsel, and I made a pretext call to Fasken Martineau to speak with the clerk, who indicated that that file of Mr. Galani's was attached to Mr. Apps, and we further went through the email between Mr. Galani to David Greenwood at Teplitsky Colson, where he references the retainer coming from Fasken Martineau to Teplitsky Colson in order to pay them for the litigation procedure.
So what do you think of Mr. Apps, the President of the Liberal Party's attempts today to distance himself from Mr. Galani?
I have no opinion of Mr. Apps. He's a lawyer, and he does what his clients pay him to do. So whether or not Mr. Galani paid him with money that he obtained fraudulently is one thing. Whether or not he acted in good faith is up to him. I have no comment on how he conducts his business.
But do you believe unequivocally that Mr. Apps worked on behalf of Mr. Galani?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you believe unequivocally that Mr. Apps worked on behalf of Mr. Galani?
Oh, absolutely. That's how he got to Teplitsky Colson, was through Mr. Apps. So obviously he was aware of the business conduct and activities.
Thank you. I think Mr. Workington has a question as well.
The bloc asked if they could take two minutes of yours. Are you willing to give it? Monsieur Guimond, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues, my Conservative colleagues, to ask these questions. In 2 minutes, could you please explain to us how one opens an offshore bank account as was done in Belize by Mr. Jaffer. So how does one go about opening an offshore bank account? Do you need signatures? Do you need identity papers? And if so, do you have in your possession any documents which might enlighten the committee if you have any such signatures to show us?
Is dependent upon the jurisdiction of where the account is established. Some countries regulate their bank accounts rather strictly because they are identified as potential narco states by the United States government. So they, in conjunction with some of their financial institutions and their government, construct rules and regulations. Some of them include producing identification, copies of reference letters from known legal sources, etc. Others won't allow a foreigner to actually open a corporation, and what you end up doing is going through law firms who have established the corporations with local board of directors, and then by which you become what's known as the beneficial owner of that corporation by buying into a trust at the various law firms. So if you need to do it without ID, it can be done. If you need to do it with ID, it can be done. You just have to pick the country in which you want to do it.
What about Belize? How does one open an account there?
Through lawyers in Belize to operate on your behalf an account, and that can be done over the internet. It can be done with a phone call. It can be done with couriers at UPS.
Thank you. We now go for 5 minutes to Madame Mendez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, Mr. Snowdy, I'd like to get the actual date of your first meeting with Mr. Hamilton, please, for the record.
Was April 9th.
April 9th.
April 9th.
Okay, thank you. You've stated that you've made no allegations of criminal wrongdoing regarding Ms. Gurges to Mr. Hamilton, yet we do know the Prime Minister based himself on his decision on serious allegations that regarding Ms. Gurges' conduct. Do you make any allegations at all about the conduct of Ms. Gurges to Mr. Hamilton? That could be
about
serious
her conduct, ma'am.
Yes.
Not only is it not my place to point fingers at a member of Parliament and question their conduct, my role in discussing.
I just wanted to know. So you've made no allegations whatsoever about that, about her conduct or criminal allegations at all. Thank you very much. Now, to address Mr. Workington's concerns, I would like to ask you about your communications with the Ethics Commissioner. Who initiated those communications or those contacts?
I received a phone call at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, April 9th. From
the same day you spoke with Mr. Hamilton the first time?
That's correct. I was actually, I actually broke a tooth the night of April 8th, grinding my teeth watching the news. I got a phone call at 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the 9th from a man identified himself as Mr. Eppo Martins. He provided me with his name and his telephone number. I was going into the dentist to have my tooth repaired, and I told him I would phone him back. I made some preliminary inquiries. I tasked one of my assistants to find out who Mr. Martins was, and I goes out of the dental chair at 3:30. I received a report back as to who Mr. Martins was and the fact he was an employee of the Ethics Commissioner's office. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I returned Mr. Martins' phone call.
And what was the theme of your discussions?
Mr. Martins said to me that he had received a letter from Mr. Guy Journeau in the Prime Minister's office, in which the letter indicated that I had made specific allegations and claims against a member of Parliament. I asked him if he would read me the letter. He put me on hold for a minute and a half, came back and read to me a letter that's had my name in it several times. It said, Derek Snowdy says this, Derek Snowdy says that, about the conduct of the minister. And I said, no, I did not say that. No, sir, I did not say that.
Are you implying he lied?
Pardon me?
Are you implying he lied?
Who lied, ma'am?
Journeau? Who wrote the letter, Mr. Journeau?
Well, I've never seen the letter, ma'am. Mr. Martins told me he had a letter from Mr. Journeau, and that's what the letter stated. And I said that no, and that in fact I'd never spoken to Mr. Journeau.
Okay.
At that point in time, Mr. Martins said to me, well, it appears I don't have a complaint here. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
And you've never had
the entire conversation lasted a grand total of 8 minutes and 35 seconds. I was on hold for a minute and a half of that. And when I got off the phone, I had a rather agitated phone call to Arthur Hamilton.
You called him. And what was said in that conversation?
There were a number of profanities and expressing.
By whom to whom?
From me to Mr. Hamilton. I was not very happy with the characterization of that conversation in that context, and Mr. Hamilton was sympathetic to my call. And
okay, I have a very short time, so I have one last question, if I may. I'm curious about something that you put up on your Facebook page on Monday, April 19th, where you write, no hearings. Methinks someone spilled the beans to Jack. Now he wants it hushed. I guess he knows now how close this is going to hit home with a certain NDP, and he needs time to prep. Can you tell us what you meant by this?
Yeah, I got annoyed with people dipping into my Facebook account. So
it's a public account.
I got annoyed to people quoting me in the matter, and I let a few friends of mine tear through it and spin the thing. As long as my Facebook account became not a reliable source of information, I could trust everybody to stop scrolling through my friends and emailing them to ask them about my childhood and everything else. And Successfully after that, people stopped quoting my Facebook account online. So as I've told a number of people, Facebook is always good for a spin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Brown for 5 minutes.
I would just note, too, we're prepared to go to the motion at any time. I realize that.
I think there are other committee members who are interested in asking questions, so if you wish to give them, if you want to be generous and give them your time, if you want to pass, that's fine. Would you like to pass?
No,
okay.
I'll take the time.
Okay.
But the hope was that if 15 minutes may not be enough time, so I was just suggesting that if there was more time. But there are a few points that I wanted to reference. Previously, Mr. Guillemot mentioned that Mr. Jaffer had said he had access to the Prime Minister's office, and people can make many claims. Did you for any second believe that claim of Mr. Jaffer's, that he actually had genuine access to the Prime Minister? And did you see any evidence that he had genuine access to the Prime Minister's office?
Mr. Browning, be very, very specific for you on this. I've heard a lot of things suggesting that Mr. Jaffer had a back door to the Prime Minister's office. Let me tell you, as a member of the common folk who tried to find the front door to the Prime Minister's office on this issue, I don't know how there's a back door because there's not even a front door.
And you know what? I think that's what I wanted to highlight. You can repeat as many times as you like that Mr. Jaffer had access to the Prime Minister's office. It doesn't mean it's correct. You can repeat a wrong statement 10 times and it's still wrong. Just like I mentioned this before on a show, every year, partisans of the Maple Leafs say, we're going to make the playoffs this year. And it doesn't mean the Maple Leafs actually make the playoffs. It's boasting. And I think in this case, clearly there was some boasting made with no actual facts to support that claim. In your investigations of Mr. Galani, did you find any evidence of even remote success, any success in lobbying or success in accessing any part of government?
I can tell you that in researching Mr. Galani's business activities for 20 years back, I haven't found one successful client, let alone access to one successful funding. All companies that he references were bogus. They'd never heard of them. It's a shell game. So not only have I not seen a grant, I've never seen a paying client. I've never seen successful financing.
Why do you think some people are trying to inflate the claims that Mr. Jaffer and Mr. Galani have allegedly made?
I've sort of given up trying to think of how you people operate up here. Obviously it becomes a sensationalistic endeavor. How can we paint the angle on this to whatever sort of advantage it suits whomever at the time? It's a classic example is, obviously the last couple of months people screaming for Ms. Sturgis's termination, and this week it's a love-in. So, take your pick.
Yeah, and I can tell you, it certainly gives me confidence to know that the type of individuals that claim to have access to government, claim to have special backdoor access to the Prime Minister's office, are the people that are clearly facing a door slammed in their face. I think what we've seen in Ottawa as we investigate lobbying, I think the benefit of this